Some of the people who have been so desperately trying to defend The Lord of the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime Video, thought they had a huge victory. They were celebrating, they were declaring victory because of articles that started coming out covering the Nielsen ratings from 4 weeks ago when Rings of Power made its 2-episode debut. Because here were the headlines, here were the tweets. Amazon Prime Video's The Lord of the Rings expansion, #Rings of Power, took the #1 position on Nielsen's streaming ratings for the week of August 29th through September 4th, with nearly 1.3 billion minutes viewed. That's the headline they were looking for. That's what they ran with. Look, it's total victory. Everybody's wrong about this show. Unfortunately, even in that data, Rings of Power is still losing to House of the Dragon. The Rings of Power holds an edge among streaming viewers only, with 12.6 million people estimated checking out the series over its first 4 days, compared to 10.6 million for House of the Dragon. However, as everyone should remember, House of the Dragon is also airing on HBO at the same time, and that makes up nearly 30% of its viewership. Adding in viewing of the latter on HBO's main cable channel, however, brings the total for House of the Dragon to 14.5 million. And that's not even counting the people who may be watching it on demand or something like that. Rings of Power loses in its premiere, in its 2-episode premiere, to 1 episode of House of the Dragon. But the numbers are pretty complicated because if you just simply look at the tally and the numbers and the watch time, you might be led to believe something different than reality. Nielsen Streaming Top 10, House of the Dragon and Rings of Power face off for the first time. The two buzziest genre projects on TV are finally having their first viewership battle. Well, we actually heard from a lot of third-party sources that showed us House of the Dragon was outpacing Rings of Power. Well, it looks like if you actually look into these Nielsen ratings, you'll find the same thing. HBO's Game of Thrones prequel series, House of the Dragon, and Amazon Prime Video's Lord of the Rings expansion, I hate that they're saying that, both appeared on Nielsen streaming rankings for the week of August 29th through September 4th, with Rings of Power coming out on top, taking #1 with 1.3 billion. And I can show you the numbers right here. Overall numbers. Lord of the Rings of Power, 1,253 million minutes, so 1.253 billion minutes watched. And then we come down here to House of the Dragon, 781 minutes watched. Of course, Game of Thrones just above that with a huge back catalog. Something like NCIS is always up there near the top with, look at that, 354 episodes. You see that a lot in streaming. Things that have, 15, 20 seasons that people are constantly playing, a lot of volume there for people to watch. Those are always going to come near the top. But the interesting thing to note is that House of the Dragon during this time period had 1 episode release, one about 60-minute episode, whereas Rings of Power had 2 brand new episodes released, totaling at around 212 minutes. So you definitely have to factor that in. In fact, if you were to assume that Rings of Power had only 1 episode release, 1 60-minute episode, you could cut that about in half, and you'd realize that that's down in the 600 million minutes watch range. These are all the things you have to look at when you actually start digging into these streaming numbers. So with that in mind, plus the fact that HBO has these numbers as well added on top of House of the Dragon, even though they're declaring victory, even though people are going to look at this as a huge win, this is not good news for Rings of Power, especially when you start realizing that when you look at some of this stuff, which we will get to, Rings of Power interest decreasing week to week, episode to episode. But anyway, let's get back to this because I want to show you where they break it down. This isn't an apples to apples comparison, as the availability of the 2 series doesn't match up exactly. Rings of Power debuted with 2 episodes on September 1st, meaning they were streamable for the last 3 days plus a few hours of Nielsen viewing window. By contrast, House of the Dragon premiered its first episode at 9 p.m. Eastern on August 21st, its second on August 28th, its third on September 4th. So what that's really saying is that episode 3 came out with only 3 hours left in this week's rating. What we're really looking at is the week-long viewership of the second episode of House of the Dragon, along with the first couple hours of viewership for the episode 3 release. So it released at a weird, funny time, but if you just think about it as 1 total episode release, that's really what you have to look at and think about for House of the Dragon. Additionally, it's important to note that Rings of Power is a streaming exclusive, while House of the Dragon has cable viewership that Nielsen's streaming chart does not account for. The contingent of House of the Dragon viewers watching the cable is sizable, 3.2 million people tuned into the premiere. It's been up to 3.5. It's been down to 2.5. But either way, you're talking 25 to 30% of people are watching it on HBO or DVR, not counting the people that are watching it on demand through cable. But it gets even more interesting when you realize this isn't even Amazon's best premiere for a TV series. It's not even the best one that they've had. Rings of Power debuts at #1 on streaming charts. While the debut for Rings is among Prime Video's best openings ever, and the first series on the platform to capture #1 overall, it's not the best. That honor still belongs to Reacher, which had 1.84 billion minutes of viewing time for its opening weekend in early February. 1.8 billion. Now, we do have to say the same thing. That had like 8 episodes that came out all at the same time for people to watch. Rings of Power only has 2 episodes. But again, the same comparison you make to that to Reacher is the one you're making for Rings of Power to House of the Dragon. Now, of course, some viewership's going to come from people watching previous episodes, but the vast majority, the bulk of these streaming minutes is going to be for these new releases. And this is where it does get interesting starting these comparisons. Rings of Power premiered with only 2 episodes, totaling 2 hours and 12 minutes. That works out to an average of about 9.5 million viewers for the 2 episodes if you divide viewing minutes by runtime, more than twice of Reacher's opening frame. A closer comparison would be to Wheel of Time, which premiered with 3 episodes. Not quite as long as the Rings of Power episode, but longer in total. Those had a combined running time of 169 minutes, equates to 6.6 million viewers. But the big thing down here, Nielsen's Reach figures, a measure of people who watch at least 6 minutes of a given program for House of Dragon and Rings of Power. The fact that House of the Dragon is outpacing this significantly by several million people, that is huge and exactly what we expected. Because what have we seen? As the Nielsen ratings continue to come out week after week, there's going to be a massive drop-off for Rings of Power because they're not debuting another 2 episodes the next week that we see. Because this is from almost a month ago that we're looking at this data from. That's how long it takes Nielsen to process it. We're talking about 1 episode with, of course, some people watching on the backlog, some people watching it. I would imagine that it's going to fall somewhere to within the House of Dragon streaming numbers themselves. Then what are they going to say? When it comes down to that and they're nearly even, plus the millions of people watching on HBO, that is going to be an embarrassment for Prime Video and for Amazon, but it's exactly what we've been expecting as we continue to see House of the Dragon viewership bump up and up over and over again as time goes by little, as word of mouth goes around. But the opposite was happening for Rings of Power. Remember, we talked about this, that Samba TV number, that 1.8 million of the Samba Track TVs that they saw, but 25% of those didn't stick around for episode 2. You'd have to imagine that's only going to continue. It's not like the buzz has been great around Rings of Power, certainly. And the most recent numbers we saw have an even worse outlook. We talked about this earlier today. This is an estimate from Whip Media and TV Time. Again, I think there's some interesting stuff to look at here. They're saying more people watched She-Hulk last week than watched Lord of the Rings of Power. If we get to that point, when those Nielsen ratings come out, holy shit, it is going to be a bloodbath. But despite the fact that a lot of people are trying to look at this and claim, oh, it's incredible, when you actually look at these numbers, all it does is confirm House of the Dragon is beating Rings of Power. And even the advantage of having 2 episodes premiering, 2 over-hour-long episodes premiering, when you look at that 1.2 billion number compared to what we're seeing from House of the Dragon with the HBO on top of it, it's certainly not going to be a good look next week when we see these numbers come out with only 1 episode coming out from each House of the Dragon and Rings of Power. What do you guys think about this? It's important to actually look at these numbers and look at all of them for context, whether it supports your narrative or not. Because at the end of the day, you can't just take something at face value or you end up looking like people that said, look what incredible victory, without actually going down and reading the reality of the situation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everyone. And a huge shout out to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram? Check out the description below. You'll find links to my P.O. box and my Patreon as well. And I'll talk to you guys later.